B'siyata d'shmaya, we're going to start Ketubot Daf Gimel. We're going to start 11 lines from the top of the Amud. And we saw on Daf Beis Amud Beis that even though Shmuel on Daf Beis Amud Aleph told us that within the framework of what we would call the Nisuin, if there's an oinus, if there's something which was out of the control of the husband, that he couldn't get married on the day that he was supposed to get married. When we say married, we mean the Nisuin in this concept that we discussed in the previous share. Then, if it was his fault, then he has to give her the mezoinus, he has to feed her. If it wasn't his fault, then is an oinus. An oinus, we know that he's exempt. And then Rava said that's all true in the context of Kiddushin, of Nisuin, but in the context of Gittin, then there's no concept of oinus, and even if somebody was an onus, it was beyond his control to fulfill the condition that he committed himself to fulfill. Nonetheless, it's as if the condition was filled and was kept, and whatever he conditioned is what happens. For example, if he says, here's the get, on condition that I come back, or I don't come back by a certain date, and the reason he didn't come back was out of his control, he was sick, etc., then we disregard the fact that it was out of his control, and we say, you said that this was a divorce, if you don't come back, you didn't come back, we don't care why, and the divorce is valid. That was the first version of Rava on Daf Beis Amud Beis. Now in the Gemara we're going to see Ikad Omra. There's another version, Omar Rava, that doesn't say Le'inyan Gittin Einoi Kain, as we saw in Daf Beis Amud Beis, rather V'chein Le'inyan Gittin. That even and also in the context of Gittin, we do appreciate that there's a concept called onus, and if the reason that he couldn't comply to the condition was out of his control, was an onus, then we do not say in that case the get was a get, and we say it's true that you said that the divorce would be a divorce if I don't come within a certain amount of time, but because the reason I didn't come was out of my control, therefore the get is not a get. Al-Mukasov Ravas, you see the Rava says, Yesh Oinus begittin, that even in the context of Gittin, we apply the rule of Oinus. Asks the Gemara, and we'll remember that on Daf Beis Amud Beis, when we were looking for sources for the first version of Rava, the Gemara brought three sources that seemed to be a source for Rava, and then the Gemara says, no, maybe it wasn't, and then the fourth and final source for Rava was that Rava said it on his own logic, a svara, as we discussed on Daf Beis. And now those three sources that were a proof for Rava version 1 are now going to be a question against Rava version 2. Meisvei, the first question is, Hareze Gitoch, then this was the first makir that we saw on Daf Beis Amud Beis. If somebody says to his wife, Hareze Gitoch, this is your get, your bill of divorce, Imlei Bosi Mikan Va'ad Shnei Masar Chodesh, if I don't come back in 12 months, and Umeis B'soich Shnei Masar Chodesh, indeed he doesn't come back because he died, then Einoi get, then the get is not a valid get, and she's not divorced, she's called a widow, she's not called divorced. And what does the Gemara deduce from there? That the Mishnah says that that's only true if the reason that he didn't come back is mace, only because he died within 12 months, therefore the get is not a valid get. Hu de'ene get? Ha chala. But if it's another oinus, for example, this man survived, he's alive, but he became sick, and therefore he couldn't come back, hareze get, it would seem that in that case the get is a get, which means the only reason the get is not a get is because at the end of the 12 months he's no longer alive, and the get cannot happen then, because dead people don't divorce their wives. However, if he's alive but sick and therefore he couldn't come back, then it seems that even though the reason he didn't come back was out of his control, he became sick, nonetheless, hareze get. So you see that we do not recognize the claim that it was out of his control, that it was an onus, contrary to Rava version 2 that we're learning about here. Says the Gemara, no. It could be that in exactly the same way as if he died within 12 months, the get is not a get, so too if the reason he didn't come back was because he became sick, and his onus, and if he's onus, then the get is not a get, even though he didn't come back by the deadline that he'd made. And what is the Mishnah coming to impress on us? Why is the Mishnah there telling us that if he died within 12 months, then the get is not considered a get. Why didn't you say even another case, which was somewhat a bigger chiddush, that even if he's alive and he didn't come back, for example, he became sick, it's also not a get, according to what Rabbi is saying now. So why does the Mishnah choose a case of mace? The Mishnah is trying to impress on us this concept that if a person would give a get to his wife and say and make it clear that the get will only be valid after the husband dies, then the get is not valid. Says the Gemara, no. Ein get la'achar misa, to teach us that you cannot give a get after he dies. In the Mishnah there, earlier on in the Mishnah, it says explicitly that if he tells his wife, here's the get after he dies, then it's not a valid get. So you see that the concept of ein get la'achar misa nothing to do with making a condition. If he tells his wife, here's the get, I want it to be valid, I want you to become divorced after he dies, then we already see explicitly early on in the Mishnah that is not called a valid get. So that's not what the second part of the Mishnah would be teaching us. If so, why does the second part of the Mishnah say that if the reason he didn't come back within 12 months was because he died, if the same is true, if he didn't die, just became sick? So we're back to what we're saying initially. It must be the Mishnah is telling us that if he became sick, then the get is a good get, because we do not accept the claim of onus, not like Rava says here. Says the Gemara, no. It could be that even though the Mishnah is talking about misa and not about that he's a choyle, nonetheless the same would be true that even if he's a choyle, the get would not be a get, because we do recognize the claim of onus. So why then do you speak about misa? Because there are some people who will say that in this case of misa, the get will be valid even though he died before the 12 months were over. How can that be? The 12 months are over. The time the end of the 12 months, the deadline arrives, this person is dead. How can he divorce his wife after he's dead? No. As we saw already on Daf Beis, there are those opinions who hold that since he wrote a date at the top of the get, he didn't say, if I don't arrive by 12 months' time next year, then this is the get. He wrote the date when he wrote the get, and he says, today I'm writing the get, and I'm making a condition, if I don't come back in 12 months, the get will be valid. Why do you write today's date? I wrote today's date in order to say that if in the event that he doesn't come back, the get is going to be valid, it's going to become effective, not at the end of the 12 months, rather retroactively when he wrote the get. When he wrote the get, he was still alive. So those chachamim will hold that the get will be valid. Dilma lafukim Rabbi, and therefore the Mishnah says, no, we don't hold like those Rabbi Yossi that we saw in Daf Beis. We don't hold like them, and even though he died within those 12 months, we don't say that retroactively the get is valid. No, we say the get would have been valid at the end of the 12 months. He's not alive at the end of the 12 months, and therefore there's no get. But it's not to exclude if he became sick. If he became sick and that's why he didn't come back, even then we say that it could be, we hold that the get will not be valid, because we say he was an onus. He would have come back if he could have. It was out of his control, and therefore the get is not a get. And that conforms with what Rava said here, that yesh onus begitten. So the first question, that means what was the first attempted proof of version 1 became the first question against Rava. In version 2, we've explained that we haven't refuted Rava. Says the Gemara, okay, fine, you've sorted out that source. Let's go to the next one. Tashema. This is another question against Rava version 2. Because it says in a Mishnah that if somebody says to his wife, Me'achshav, from now, retroactively, this should be the get. He explicitly says that if I don't come back within 12 months, then the get will take effect when he wrote the get. And he died within 12 months. Get. Then why should it not be a get? The get is valid. My love, can we not assume that even if he became sick, and that's why he didn't come back, we'll say that in the same way as if he died, and that's why he didn't arrive, and there's no bigger onus than that, and then we say retroactively the get will be valid, because retroactively he was alive. When he wrote the get, he was still alive. So too if he became sick. And if he became sick, and that's why he didn't come, the get will be a valid get, even though it was out of his control. And that's not like Rava version 2, who says that there is onus, that we do recognize the claim of onus begitin. Says the Gemara, no. Meis dafka. Only if he dies within the 12 months, then we say retroactively the get will be valid and she's divorced. Why? Because we take it for granted that that's what he had in mind, that if he would die, then his wife should not be a widow and have to marry his brother. We're talking about a case where he didn't have children and would have to do yibum. He wanted to prevent and to avoid her having to deal with yibum or chalitza that we learnt about in Masechet Ketubot, and therefore he says that the get should be valid. However, in a case where he's still alive and he just couldn't come because he was chola, he was an onus, he may well not have intended the get to be valid, and it could well be that in the case of choli, in that case the get will not be valid, like Rava says that yesh oinus begitin. Okay, so now the Gemara is taking what was source number 3 as question number 3. Toshima, another question against Rava. Me'ahida omar luhu. From the source that if a person says to his wife, or he says, if I don't come back within 30 days, lehava gita, this will be a get. Also, he does come back at the end of 30 days. Uposki mabra, but the mabra, the river crossing, separated him between the town he was supposed to come in and where he was. He couldn't cross the bridge, but he was there, just on the outskirts of the city that he said he needed to get back to in order for the divorce not to be valid. And he's saying to the people, Chazu, look, Dasoy, I've arrived. I just can't come into the city because I can't get over the river. Chazu Dasoy, see that I've arrived. Shmuel says, you haven't arrived in town, and therefore you said that if you don't come back within 30 days, the divorce will be valid. And here you are, you haven't arrived, the divorce is valid. Well, you, Rava, says that by Gittin, in the second version of Rava, yesh oinus begittin, that if it was out of his control, we accept that, and the get will not be valid. So why is Shmuel saying the get is valid, according to this version of Rava? Says the Gemara, it's also not a question. When do we say that we can recognize and respect the claim of it wasn't my fault? That's only when you couldn't have expected this unusual and out of control circumstance. For example, you became sick. You couldn't have expected, there's no reason you should expect to become sick. Over here, you knew there was a river there, and you knew you might not be able to cross the river, so why didn't you initially say, if I don't come back within 30 days, but if I do get to the river, to the edge of the city, and I just can't cross the river, then it's considered as if I'm back. Why didn't you explicitly state that? So since it's an oinsa de shchiach, since it's an oinus, it's out of his control, but something which could have been foreseen and expected, Shani, that's different. Since he should have explicitly made that condition, that if I get to the edge of the city and I can't come in because of I don't have a boat or a bridge, that it's considered as if I came back. And he didn't make that condition, then it's his own loss, and he must have taken that into account when he said that initially, and therefore the get is a good get, and it's not a reason to refute Rava that says in a regular type of einus, where it's not to be expected that you would have that out of control situation like cholo, he became sick. In that case, we do accept the fact there was an onus and the get is not a get. Continues the Gemara. And this takes us now back to the Mishnah. We saw in the Mishnah on Daf Beis Amud Aleph that Beis Din would sit fixed days, Mondays and Thursdays, and therefore, in order that, in case there's tainas besulim, in case the husband, it becomes clear to the husband on the night after the chuppah that she had had relations with somebody whilst they were an Eisha Sish, whilst they were married but not yet Nisuin, we discussed this on Daf Beis, that he should immediately come to Beis Din and say, I have reason to believe that she did znus after the kiddushin, before the nisuin, in which case it's also for me to keep her. I have to divorce her. And in order that he shouldn't calm down and just, so to speak, forgive her, when according to the halacha he has to divorce her, we say, get married the night before, the evening before the Beis Din sit, in order that you can come straight to Beis Din and make your claim. You shouldn't have time to calm down. Omer of Shmuel bar Yitzchok. Shmuel bar Yitzchok says, Lo shonu, that's only true, elo mitakonas Ezra ve'elach. That's only after Ezra made his takona and instated that the Beis Din she'ein boti dinim kvuin elo b'sheni u'b'chamishi, that the Beis Din, they sit on a fixed date, on fixed times, fixed days, on Mondays and Thursdays. So in that case, get married the day and night before Monday or Thursday. On Sunday you can't get married because the Chachomim said you need 3 days to prepare for the Chasna. So you get married on Wednesday, as it says in the Mishnah, Basula Nisis Liyei Maravi. You get married on Wednesday, then the chuppah is on Wednesday sometime, then at night they have relations, and then he can see if she's a basula, if she's not a basula. And if she's not a basula, he'll come to Beis Din on Thursday. Aval koidem takonas Ezra, but before takonas Ezra, sheboti dinin kvuim b'kol yom, where before Ezra, there were every single day the Beis Din would sit. In that case, isha nesas b'chol yom, and isha is nesas, she can get married any day, because any day, if he realizes that she's not a basula, the next day the Beis Din will be there. Says the Gemara, I don't understand. Why are you, Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchok, telling us what happened before Takonas Ezra? What relevance does that have today? Kodim Takonas Ezra, Maida Hava Hava, that's history. Whatever's been has been. Why did you find it necessary to make a statement about what was before? Answers the Gemara, Hochi Ka'omar. What Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchok was trying to impress on us was that Ikabote Dinin Kvuin Ha'idna Kakodim Takonas Ezra, in the event that there's a place where the Beis Din sit every day, and not just on Mondays and Thursdays, that means if nowadays there's a place which is similar to what was before Ezra, then Ishanisis B'chol Yom, in that case, a woman can get married any day and doesn't have to get married, especially on a Wednesday. Says the Gemara, you're saying that in that case, Isha Nisis B'chol Yom, that seems to be she can get married on a Sunday, on a Monday, on a Tuesday, Haba'in on Shogdu. We saw already on Daf Beis Amud Aleph, there's a concept called Shogdu that the Chachomim said that you have to toil and invest in preparing for the Chasna for 3 days, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. You can't get married before Wednesday. Says the Gemara, you're right. If he needs to prepare, then indeed he should not get married before Wednesday. But the Torichle, in the case that he's already prepared from before Shabbos, and the whole chasna, all the festivities and the meal, everything is already prepared, then indeed he can get married even on Sunday or Monday, even at the beginning of the week. Says the Gemara that I don't understand. We had here Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchok, who's an Amoira, and he says you can get married any day if Beis Din sit every day. And you asked a question, Shoktu. Who introduced us to Shoktu? Another Amoira. On Daf Beis Amud Aleph, Shmuel mentioned it. You're asking a question from one Amoira to another Amoira. Why should one Amoira have to be answerable to another Amoira? So it seems that there's a much earlier source to this concept of Shoktu, and that's why all the Amoraim are answerable to it. My Shoktu. Where do we find the early source of Shoktu? Says the Gemara Tanya, it's in a Tosefta, in a Braisa. The Tosefta says as follows: Mipnei Omru, why did the Chachomim say, and it's in the Mishnah, that Basula Nisis Liyei Maravi, that a Basula, a yet unmarried girl, should get married on Wednesday. Because in the event that in the night the husband has a claim, there were no Basulim there, Hoya Mashkim LeBeis Din, in the morning he would come straight to Beis Din, and he would make his claim. And you would say, maybe she's done znus, maybe I have to divorce her. Then asks the Gemara, or asks the Tosefta, the Braisa, V'tinose be'echad b'Shabbos. Okay, but Beis Din are sitting not only on Thursday, but also on Monday. So she can get married on Sunday, which was a question the Gemara discussed already on Daf Beis. And if he has a claim of Basulim, Hoya Mashkim LeBeis Din, then he'll come to Beis Din on Monday. Answers the Tosefta, Shoktu Chachomim. This is exactly what we saw in Daf Beis Amud Aleph. The Chachomim made that decree that the people have to diligently prepare and invest in the festivities of the Chasna. Al Takonas B'nai Yisrael. This was instated for the sake of the B'nai Yisrael. Sheihei Odom Teireach B'Suda, that a person should toil and invest in preparing the meal. Shleisha Yomim, 3 days. Echad b'Shabbos on Sunday, v'sheni b'Shabbos on Monday, u'shlishi b'Shabbos, u'b'Revi, and on Wednesday, kainsa. He gets married on Wednesday. So this is the Braisa, the Tosefta, that introduced to us the concept of Shoktu. Continues the Tosefta. Once we start with the Tosefta is going to continue. We have to concentrate on every word here, and the Gemara is going to discuss why the different terminologies are used. There was a concept called sakona. There was a danger, there was a risk. From the time that it became dangerous to get married on Wednesday, nohagu ha'om, then it became a custom for most people not to get married on Wednesday, but to get married on Tuesday, because Wednesday was a danger. We'll soon see what the danger was. And the Chachamim did not protest, even though there was a takonas Chachamim. The Chachamim made their takona, a decree, or they instated that a basula gets married on Wednesday because of tainas basulim. But no, since it was dangerous on Wednesday, then many people, they changed the days of the chasna to Tuesday. The Chachamim didn't protest. Ubesheni lo yichnes. However, on Monday shouldn't get married. That means if because of some danger it became a challenge to get married on Wednesday, then get married on Tuesday. At least you have 2 days to prepare, Sunday and Monday. But don't get married on Monday, because that leaves you with just 1 day to prepare. The Chachamim wanted you to spend more time preparing. Now it seems to be another concept that Tosefta is saying, the Brisa is saying, that if it was an oinus, if there was some situation that was out of their control, then mutter. It doesn't say the Chachamim were not meicha, it just says mutter, which means that an odd individual here and there would come to Beis Din and say, I want to get married on a Monday because of oinus, there's some situation of which is out of our control. Then as an individual, it wasn't noagu aham. It wasn't something which the masses had that custom, changed the custom. No, it was just individuals that the Beis Din would say, you know what, it's mutter for you, you can get married even on Monday. We'll have to see what's going on. What was the danger that the public would then, or the noagu ha'om, to get married on Tuesday? What was the oinus, the out-of-control situation that allowed individuals to get married on Monday? We're going to have to see that in the Gemara in a moment. Continues the Tosefta. Umafrishin es hachosn v'esakala leilei Shabbos tchila b'pnei shehu oiseh chabura. That in the event that chosn and kala hadn't yet had relations by Friday night, then they would separate them, because the Chachamim didn't want that the Bia Rishona, the first time that they have relations together, should be on Friday night, because we're going to learn about that later. He's making a type of a wound, and to do that on Shabbos could be halachically challenged, and therefore, according to the Tosefta, then mafrishin es hachosn min hakala, we separate the two on Friday night because of chabura. That's the end of the Tosefta, the end of the Brisa. Why did we bring this Brisa? For the source of Shoktu, that in a normal circumstances, there should be 3 days of preparation before getting married on Wednesday. And now the Gemara is going to discuss the end of this Brisa, that there were such situations where they could get married on Tuesday and even on Monday. My sakona, what danger are you talking about? That nohagu om, it caused the masses to get married on Tuesday, not on Wednesday. Ilema. The Omri Basula Hanisis Liemaravi Tihorik. Is it that if there was some decree that some governing official or somebody would make this decree and say anyone who gets married on Wednesday is going to be killed? If so, Nohagu? If that's what the situation was, that anyone who gets married on Wednesday is going to be killed, then what's the noagu? As if it's a custom that many people took on not to get married on Wednesday. Legamri neakre. The Chachamim would have had to get up and say, you're not allowed to get married on Wednesday. And we're going to undermine and uproot the entire takona of Basula Nisas Liemaravi. And since the Brisa doesn't say that they totally nullified the takona, it seems that the danger wasn't that whoever gets married on Wednesday will be killed. So Omar Rabbi says, no, I'll tell you what the danger is. The Omri, because they said there, and the governor said that Basula Anisas B'yem Haravi, a yet unmarried girl who gets married on Wednesdays, Tiboy Legomin, Tchila, has to first have relations, has to first have a beer with the governor, some guy. And in order to avoid that, they said, don't get married on Wednesdays, get married on Tuesday. Says the Gemara, Hi Sakona, why are you calling that a danger? There's nothing dangerous about that. Oynusu. It's an oinus. If a non-Jewish person by forcefully takes a woman and does nus with her, it's an oinus. And if it's an oinus, it doesn't mean that she cannot get married to her husband, even though she's an Eishes Ish, because we're talking about she's already done the Kiddushin a year earlier. She's just not Nesuah yet. She hasn't finished the process of getting married, hasn't done Chuppah and Nisuin yet. But since this Nus would be Ba'oinus, it's not something she's choosing to do, it's something that's being forced and imposed on her, then she can get married the next day. Or she can get married whenever she wants to her husband. She doesn't become Asa. So what's the danger here? Says the Gemara, no. Mishum de'ikat tznuos, you have the very modest women who just won't settle for that. They'll say, they say, we are about to get married to our husbands, tznuos, we're not having this. We are not going anywhere near a goy. We're not letting that goy touch us. And what would happen is, if they would put up a protest, then this goy, this governor, this hegmoin, would kill them. And that was the danger. And these tznuos would be put into danger. Those who are not so tznuos would say, okay, what can I do? He's forcing it upon me, and whatever he does, and I'll get married to my husband and try and get over it. But the tznuos, they'll put up a fight, and for them it will be dangerous. Says the Gemara, if that's the issue, so get up in shul and tell all the tznuos, da'oinus shari, that even if he does it to you, since he's doing it to you by force, you can still get married to your husband. It's not asa, it's not called znus on that level. And then they won't put up a fight, and it won't be dangerous for them. Why do you have to undermine the takonos chachomim? Says the Gemara, no. The problem is, if we're going to get up and tell the tznuos that even if there's a znus, since it's ba'oinus, it doesn't become asa to the husbands, then the prutzos, the less modest girls, they're going to hear this, and they're going to say, the ikka prutzos, and those prutzos are going to say, oh wow, you mean it's not so bad to get that close, to have relations with this guy, and they're going to do it barotzen. They're going to voluntarily be happy to have such an affair with a guy, and if they do it happily, it's called znus. And then they will be asa to the husbands. And because of the prutzos, we can't tell everybody that oinus is mutter. And since we can't tell everyone, that tznuos won't know, they'll put up a fight, it will be dangerous for them. And also the ikanami koyanos. You've got the koyanos. The halacha is that even though a regular Yisrael is marrying a regular Yisrael, a Yisrael is allowed to marry somebody that znus was done to her by force. However, a kohen is not allowed to marry, even if the znus was done by force. He's not allowed to marry this woman that znus was done to her by force. So somebody who's about to marry a kohen is going to put up a fight, because she knows she can't get married to her husband. She can't stay married to her husband if this guy gets too close to her. And since there's either because of the prutzos or the koyanos, which there would be moiser nefesh, and they'll put up a fight, because that means for the koyanos it won't even help to say that oinus is mutter, because oinus is not mutter for a kohen, and therefore it was a danger, and since it was a danger, many had the custom to get married on Tuesday. Says the Gemara, V'liakrei. So why don't you uproot the whole takana and say there's no takana of a woman getting married on Wednesdays, and that's it? Everyone should get married when they want, and they'll avoid Wednesdays. Why is it just noagu ha'om? Says the Gemara, Gezeira avida de botla. This hegman, this governor, so he made this decree now, very cruel. He'll get over it. At the end of the day, it will get nullified. But to counter the rabbanon, mikam gezeira lo yakrinon. Once the chachomim make a takana, there's something which is fixed, there's something permanent, and we're not in a rush to undermine such a takana. Says the Gemara, ihachi. If it's really got this danger, and therefore the noagu ha'om, they would avoid getting married on Wednesdays, because the decree was that anyone who gets married on Wednesday has to do znus with this hegmoin. Bishlishi nami also boil. What's stopping this governor coming on Tuesdays? If people stop getting married on Wednesdays, they get married on Tuesdays, he'll come on Tuesdays. Answers the Gemara, no. He's not going to know exactly when are they getting married on Wednesdays, are they getting married on Tuesdays. If it's not clear to him that which day they're getting married, he won't bother coming. Okay, so we've explained that statement in the Brisa. But in the Tosefta continue to another statement that Ubasheni lo yichnes, but they shouldn't get married on Mondays, because then you only have one day to prepare. However, if there was an out of control situation, then mutter, you can get married even on Mondays. The Gemara is asking, my oinus, what's this situation which is not in their control? Ilay mehada omron, Are you going to say that this Hegmoin said that anyone who gets married on Tuesdays as well as Wednesdays is also Tiboy Legomoin? If so, then why are you changing your terminology? Just say, if it's a sakona on Wednesday, you can get married on Tuesday. If it's also a sakona on Tuesday, you can get married on Monday. Hasam korile sakona, hacha korile oinus. Why when you're moving from Wednesday to Tuesday, you call it a sakona, a danger, but when moving from Tuesday to Monday, you call it an oinus. V'su, and also hasam nohagu. In the case when it's a sakona, it says nohagu, which means that the masses, they got married on Tuesday instead of Wednesday. Hocha, but in the case of moving it from Tuesday to Monday, it's just mutter. It wasn't most people did it. It was individuals who came to Beis Din and said, we have a situation of oinus, can we get married on Monday? Beis Din will say it's mutter. So it's not probable that the oinus we're talking about, which allows them to move from Tuesday to Monday, is the same as the sakona, the danger, which allows them to move from Wednesday to Tuesday. What's going on? Omarova, the Omri, because when it became clear that Sori Tzava, the officers of the army, Ba'aleir, if the officers of the army are coming on Wednesday they're coming, in that case, that's already oinus, because they're going to come, and typically they're going to take away all the food. You prepared a whole lavish chasna, a whole festive meal, and they're going to come, and they're going to take away the food. The army is going to take the food away. That's called an oinus, and then you can move it back to Monday. We'll soon see why Monday, what's with Tuesday. Okay. Says the Gemara, Heichadomi, what are we talking about? If this officer of the army is just coming, staying for a day or two, and then leaving, okay, liakev, then just get married a week later. So they'll take whatever food they take. You lose what you lose, you'll prepare next week, you'll get married next week. Why do you have to undermine etakonos chachomim? Says the Gemara, Loi. Tzricha, the Brisa has to tell us that this oinus would force them to change the day of their getting married, the osi v'kova, because this sar tzova, this officers of the army, they're coming and they're planning to stay. Says the Gemara, okay, but when are they coming? They're coming on Wednesday. Begimel miolichnos. So you prepared Sunday, Monday. They're coming on Wednesday. Get married on Tuesday. Why would that be a reason to get married on Monday? Says the Gemara, Asparva didei begimel kaosi. You've got the soldiers that are coming a day in advance to prepare for the officers and to prepare for the army, and that when they come, which is a day in advance on Tuesday, they're going to steal and take away all the food. So that's called an oinus. In that case, then one can get married on, if an individual comes to Beis Din and says, we're going to lose all our food, can we get married on Monday? Beis Din will say mutter, they can get married on Monday. Another explanation as to what the last phrase that phrase in the Brisa, that if there's an oinus, a situation out of control, mutter, you can even get married on a Monday. That it's not talking about that the officers are coming and they're going to steal the food. No. My machmas oinus, what oinus are we talking about that allows them to get married on Monday instead of Wednesday? It's a completely different type of oinus. It's talking about avelus. If the chosno, the kala, lost a parent on that Monday, then they're allowed to get married on Monday, and because they cannot wait till Wednesday, because they'll be in the middle of the week of mourning, sitting shiva, and we're going to learn this in the next shiur in Yitzchok Hashem.